Oh, Jesus. Sorry, pal.
We are talking Let the Wrong One In, and this one is directed and written by Connor McMahon, and is a vampire horror comedy from Ireland. And this one stars Anthony Stewart Head, who you may know from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, where he played Giles the Watcher. And in this movie, he's kind of playing a spoofy version of a very kind of similar character. Now, the crux of the story tells the story of two brothers, the older of which has been bitten by a vampire and was already at odds with his family, being a bit of a loose cannon and a troublemaker, but now has the added pressure of becoming a vampire and not really knowing what he's doing in regards to that either. And it's really about the relationship between the brother who is now a vampire and the younger brother who is kind of the good son, if that makes sense. And the good son, Matt, doesn't know whether to try and help his older brother, Deco, or try and stake him. And then we have Henry, played by Anthony Stewart Head, as a vampire slayer who may help or hinder. What will happen? You have to watch the movie and find out. Now, comedies by their very nature are a subjective genre. What some will find funny, other people will not. And then you have horror comedies, which even kind of whittles that down further. Now, this type of horror comedy, I have to say, is kind of on the kind of the Bridesmaid style kind of comedy. If you've seen the movie Bridesmaids, it's a little bit like that in some ways. Kind of somewhat gross out, fart humour, things like this. Lots of kind of body horror, but in a kind of very comedic kind of sense. So it's certainly not a refined sense of humour, this one. You're not going to have a subtle satire on the state of horror movies and things like that. It is going to be a gooey, messy mess with lots of kind of swearing and gross out kind of like gags and stuff like that. So, you know, you've got to decide whether that's something you're going to want to watch to begin with. What do we think that works in this movie? So there are some things that I did find funny. There are a couple of little kind of nods here and little references that I found funny. The name to start with is obviously, you know, a kind of a spoof on another kind of famous vampire movie. We have a couple of little nods to vampire that I found quite funny. For example, when Deco, the older brother, kind of grows fangs, he asks if it's giving him a lisp, which is one of the kind of like the critiques I always have of kind of vampire films, and you know, that was kind of quite funny. Things like this. You know, the character of Giles kind of being sent up in by Anthony Stewart Head, always kind of getting knocked out and tied up like he was in the kind of the Buffy the Vampire show. There's a couple of funny little gags and things speckled throughout the movie that I did quite enjoy. It's a very kind of like, as I say, fairly quick paced and kind of gross out humour that certainly is explosive in more ways than one. There are actually some reasonable kind of special effects here, I have to say. Now, some of them are done in a very kind of like old-fashioned Evil Dead sort of style way, with kind of like the kind of bodies decomposing, kind of looking like stop motion, like they did in Evil Dead. I think it's kind of probably done by design, because there is some reasonable kind of practical makeup as well. But it's done with kind of a tongue-in-cheek kind of style. There are some effects that don't work very well, but I don't think this movie is too concerned necessarily about having you know, particularly kind of realistic effects and stuff. But there are some, I guess, some fun effects. There are some sillier ones as well. But there you go. I actually kind of quite liked the relationship between the two brothers, to be honest with you. It's obviously played for comedic effect, but I still kind of quite liked it. And there is a little bit of heart there, I have to say. It does have a little bit of an emotional core, despite this movie being so kind of over the top with its kind of comedic sensibilities as well. It still has a little bit of kind of heart there, and as the kind of the movie progresses, obviously the relationship between these brothers kind of like goes one way or another, depending on the kind of the situation. I quite enjoyed Anthony Stewart's Head character here as this kind of like this vampire slayer who has a little bit of a kind of a geek fetish with trains and things like that. I thought that was all quite fun. And you know, it's a fun and light-hearted approach to kind of the vampire legend, with it does have a little bit of a, you know, a story. Some of these horror comedies can be a little light on the story. This one at least does attempt to have somewhat of a story here in regards to these kind of like these vampires trying to kind of take over Dublin, I believe it is, which was all kind of quite good. What doesn't work, again, we're going to just go back to the horror. A lot of these jokes kind of fell a little bit flat for me. I just think it's a little bit too silly, certainly for my taste. Now this is, I'm trying to think maybe for a broader audience here, you know, what people will think. But I gotta say, I think the humour is maybe a little juvenile. Certainly for me at least. And it kind of, you're thinking about the silly-o-meter, I don't know, this one kind of, the bar's quite high on how kind of silly this movie is, to be honest with you. As I've kind of mentioned, some of the effects were quite good, but some of them don't particularly look particularly well, including some relatively basic stuff like some fangs just kind of like moving around when they're in people's mouths and things like that. Some, you know, I can understand sometimes you would the more complex effects, they're kind of more homagous to kind of maybe other things, and you can kind of get away with having it. But some basic stuff like making sure the kind of the fangs are cemented in place was a little bit of a slip for me. This movie being from Ireland, but it's, even for me who lives in England, and obviously Ireland isn't all that far away, it kind of is a little bit difficult to understand, to be honest. So they're very thick Irish accents from certain characters, and they talk very fast in some scenes, and it's sometimes hard to really understand what's kind of going on. I have to say, all the kind of shenanigans that were kind of going on, all the kind of like the hyperactiveness of some of the kind of the characters, and I've got to be honest with you, I found it a little grating at times, to be honest. I think for me, the kind of the idea was just a little strict. It's not a particularly long film, but it was just a little bit kind of like the same sort of jokes over and over again, and it got a little bit tiresome after a while. Again, this is only my kind of point of view. As I say, you might really love this kind of style of humour. It's fun, but a little bit tiresome for me. I did like some of the gags here. It is kind of like very much a kind of a splattery, gooey fun with lots of kind of fart jokes, and there are a few winks of the kind of the horror genre and stuff like that. It's certainly a watchable film. I don't think it's a particularly horror classic in any sort of sense of the words. It's an enjoyable one-time watch for me. But it's not something I would kind of think about going back to. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.